Troll Nation, Chris here with telesplashgaming, and I'm here to talk about arcade games. As a kid growing up in the late 80s and early 90s, I spent a lot of time at different arcades, pizza parlors, even your gas stations had a pinball or arcade machine. I would go in there, I'd pump my quarters in, and when I was out, I'd run around in circles, and I'd push that coin release button as fast as I could, trying to get my money back. And you know what? I can't be the only one. And with that, I spent a lot of time playing these arcade games. And many of them, like Turtles in Time, like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, many of the classics ended up coming to home consoles. But today I want to talk about a few of them that didn't. Now, with that being said, there's always the quotes. A couple of these did make it for a small period of time, but now you can't get them again. So I'm going to talk about a few arcade classics that you played as a kid, you invested lots of time and money into, but they never made it to your home console. So let's take a look. Alright, we're going to start off with an easy home run that I think anybody who grew up in the early 90s and the late 80s will remember playing, and that is the XMen Arcade. The classic beat-em-up that started off as a 4-player cabinet, moved its way on to a 6-player, but we'll talk about that in a second. You know, Konami has been responsible for pumping out gems and gems and gems of arcade classics year after year, and XMen was no exception. Featuring, you know, a vast array of X-Men characters from Wolverine and Nightcrawler, Storm, Cyclops. I don't know how, you know, some of these characters made it in, but I used to love playing as Colossus, but I've always been a Wolverine fan. And being able to play as your favorite mutant with 5 of your mutant friends right next to you on the 6-player arcade cabinet was insane. We actually had the 6-player arcade cabinet in the town I grew up in, and it was amazing to play that game. And I remember beating it, pumping in quarter after quarter and playing this game. The graphics at the time were incredible because they really kind of modeled the 1990s cartoon series that was going on at the same time. So when you're a kid on Saturday mornings watching the X-Men cartoon, then hitting up your local arcade afterwards and playing as your favorite mutant, it was amazing. Magneto, the Blob, the Juggernaut. There were some really great villains that covered the whole variety of the Marvel Universe in this arcade cabinet. But you know what? It never really got a true home release. Now I say that because it did get an HD port on the PlayStation Networks and the Xbox Live service. But what happened after a couple years, the licensing got revoked and then it disappeared. And now you cannot play this arcade classic on your Xbox or your PlayStation. And I believe it was also for mobile. So because licensing, we only got it for a very small period of time. And if you were able to download it, good for you. But as of now, you can't even get it again. So if you have it in your library, that's awesome. But for most of us, this is one that never made it to the home console. Next, moving on to a juggernaut in all things pop culture, and that's Star Wars. Between the books, the games, the comics, the movies, the toys, they have everything covered. They also had some amazing pinball machines and arcade cabinets, but my favorite was the Star Wars Trilogy arcade released in '98. When you saw this, you knew you were jumping into the cockpit and going to a galaxy far, far away, covering the original trilogy. Starting off, you're on the Battle of Yavin, you're in your X-Wing, you're fighting off the Empire, you're working your way to the Death Star, and then eventually you have to fight off Darth Vader and his ship. It was an awesome way to start. Then you move to the Empire Strikes Back. The snow-covered Hoth. You're going around, you're fighting off the AT-ATs, the AT-ATs, whatever you want to call them. I still don't even know how to pronounce that stupid thing, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And then you're even having to fight off a couple of Wampas, if you're lucky. And then you move on to the last, the final, the epic conclusion of the trilogy, Return of the Jedi. And you're on your speeder, you're going around dodging trees. You eventually end up at some boss fights, you're fighting Boba Fett, you're having to deflect his blaster shots, knock him into the Sarlacc pit, and if you're lucky, you get to battle Darth Vader in an epic showdown with your lightsaber out. It was an incredible experience, and as a 12-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid at the time, it was awesome. It was one of the coolest experiences in an arcade I'd ever had. But you never got to experience it on a home console. And you know what? This is one of those games where it doesn't really bother me because to experience it in that full, huge screen in the cockpit, you really felt like you were there. And that would be really hard to replicate, especially on a console, on a TV, and back then on CRT televisions. But you know what? I really wish we could get an opportunity to play it on a home console, a PC, on anything. But if you have a chance, check out the Star Wars Trilogy. It is a really fun, immersive experience. You know, arcades were filled with beat 'em ups. Beat 'em ups were the popular thing in the 90s. And you know what? One of the best is based on the longest running television show, The Simpsons. The Simpsons Arcade was awesome. And if you have a MAME cabinet, that's about the only way you can play it. Or if there's a local arcade. You got to pick one of your favorite, characters from the movie between the Simpson family and go on an adventure. You're beating people with, your vacuum. You're using your skateboard, it didn't matter. You had up to 4 of your friends playing, the graphics were fun, the references during the games were fantastic, the bosses were really funny, the voice acting sounded great, the sound effects, it was everything Simpsons. Much like X-Men, The Simpsons did actually get a small window release on the PlayStation Network and the Xbox Live. But due to licensing, it was around for about 2 years, that was around 2012, and then it disappeared. So if you didn't buy it at the time and download it, you cannot access The Simpsons on any console. And that is a true shame. I know everybody loves Turtles in Time. That is a great beat 'em up, one of my favorites, but at least we got the home port to it. Simpsons, I think, is just as good as that, and many people have never had a chance to play it, especially the younger generation who missed the arcade scene when it was popular. So, The Simpsons Arcade. Wish it came to a home console. I think we have a chance at getting it someday again. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Next up is an arcade made known because of my buddies, the tag team champs, Robert and Wes at Gaming Off the Grid. Now their channel did a video on this arcade, and that is House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn. It's the most recent addition to gaming utilizing the Unreal Engine. It was released just last year. Scarlet Dawn brings everything you love about the House of the Dead series, but being the latest and greatest, you get to enjoy all the perks of modern gaming with great sound, amazing graphics, responsive shooting. The game not only belongs exclusively on arcades, but it belongs exclusively at Dave & Buster's. As you can see, my buddies here had to go all the way to Dave & Buster's to play this game. They set up shop, they did some recording. I mean, just look at the cabinet. The cabinet is freaking awesome. And this is one that they said was probably one of their favorite House of the Dead games, and they're all about their on-rail shooter, and they love House of the Dead. I can't remember if it was Robert or Wes, but I think Robert said it was his favorite House of the Dead game. So that's saying something. They had some great games. But you won't even find it at your local arcade. You won't find it anywhere unless you go to Dave & Buster's. So if you're a House of the Dead fan, you definitely need to search out a local Dave & Buster's and go check this one out. With that being said, I did hear some rumors that they could possibly bring this to console in the future. So if you are a House of the Dead fan, this would be an awesome addition to your light gun games. Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is the next game up, and it's one that I actually never played in the arcade, but it's found on so many lists of the best beat-em-up arcade games that I had to put it on here. You know what, the story, most people didn't even know, but it involves a gang going out hunting dinosaurs, and you take control, you take over, and you lay a beat down on these gang members to stop the dinosaur catastrophe from happening. It features 4 playable characters, 8 unique worlds, and dinosaurs that can either help you or hinder you depending on how they're feeling that day, and there is co-op up to 3 players. It had a really fun take on the beat 'em up genre, and it was just one of those where people seem to love this and it always pops up on lists. It never had a console release. They did release a Cadillacs and Dinosaurs game for the Sega CD, but it was nothing like the classic beat 'em up that came before it, so it doesn't really count. It was more of an on-rail shooter, I believe. It was nothing like the beat 'em up genre. Next up is Ninja Baseball Batman. Now this is the rarest arcade on the list. At the time, only 43 of the 1,042 units sold were in the United States. So only 43 made it to the US. And this is another beat 'em up featuring 4 robots who were employed by the Commissioner of Baseball, and you're hired to find out and lay another whooping on people who stole artifacts from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Kind of funny. The character you play resembled some characters from that, generation of baseball, but people call this one of the better beat 'em ups, and it's an incredibly rare game that most people never had a chance to play. This is an ideal arcade that would be a perfect port for those of us who never had a chance to play the original arcade game. I mean, with only 43, it's a major collector's item, and unless you go to Japan, you're probably not going to get a chance to play this one unless they port it someday. And the Angry Video Game Nerd had it on one of his Batman lists, and that's kind of where it got a little bit of traction from there. So, Ninja Baseball Batman. If you see this arcade game, You are one of the few. Pump a few quarters in and check it out. Next up is WWF Restless / Superstars. Yes, not WWE, WWF, because that was when I grew up watching wrestling. And these arcade games have WWF on them. Now they're two different games, but they are both made by Technos, and WrestleFest is the sequel to Superstars, so they have a similar look, even though they are a little bit different. But these were amazing. When you were a kid and you were at the height of Hulkamania in the late 80s, early 90s, you always pumped over and played some WrestleFest or Superstars. It was a fun arcade game. It was hard. It was definitely one where if your health was getting low, you had to pump quarters in to keep going, but it was so fun. And it's still one of my favorite wrestling games ever. The graphics still hold up. They're larger than life sprites, great moves. There was finishing moves in WrestleFest. It was a really cool arcade cabinet at the time. It's still really cool now, but it never really got a port. They did do a mobile port with a modern roster, but I don't count that as a true port to consoles or even to cell phones. I want the original with Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase. I want Earthquake, Demolition, I can go on and on. I want the original late 80s, early 90s Superstars back on a home console. Alright guys and gals, that rounds out the list for arcade games that never got a true console port. Let me know if any of these games were ones that you pumped your hard-earned parents' dollars into. When you were a kid, you always just wanted one more quarter, just one more, just another dollar with a change machine. People growing up today that are younger, you guys missed out on the golden era of arcade gaming. Arcades were the place to go. So, let me know what arcade games you guys liked, if you'd like to see any of these ported, and if you liked the arcade video. Keep trolling, keep rolling. We'll talk to you guys soon.